Hi, anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly. I've recently returned from London, where I had a wonderful visit to the British Museum that has inspired today's episodes. Today we'll discuss the death rituals of ancient Egyptians, which I am obsessed with, and I hope you'll enjoy.
I'm very excited.
Ooh, I'm very excited. Before our question of the day, we also wanted to shout out our friends at Ghostcasters. We love the podcast community and are tickled that they have enjoyed our episodes. You can listen to them wherever you get your podcast under Ghostcasters. That's all one word. And you can give them a listen or a follow.
Yeah, I just reached out to them one day because they talked about something that was similar to the Paulding Light.
Mm-hmm.
And we just had a really good conversation, and they shouted out our own episode when referencing it. And so I thought that was just really cool, and they were really, really
They're
nice.
so lovely.
So I think they deserve a good shout out from us.
Absolutely. Go check them out wherever you get your podcasts and give them a listen or a follow.
They also have really wonderful Southern accents that are just like nice and soothing to listen to.
That is nice. Okay, so Sam, what's the question today?
My question is kind of something that we experience a lot of, a variety of. What is your favorite type of weather?
Ooh, very good question. My favorite type of weather is actually pretty much this, because I'm a water person. And even though this morning it felt like I was walking the dog inside someone's mouth, I was still really happy because it's at least nice outside. We have so many days here that are so crappy and so gray because of where we are. And I love it when we finally get some summer.
Yeah, I love, like, today's nice. I didn't get to see the storm this morning, unfortunately. 'Cause where I work, I don't have a lot of windows. But I love a really good storm.
Yes, you're right. That's always fun too. And if you have thunder and lightning, like, even better.
My sister literally built a tower in her house so she can watch good storms. So whenever I'm up visiting her and there's a storm, we are just bunkered up in her tower.
It's cool, you guys. I remember going there now. I was like, wait a minute, I have been to this tower.
Yes, it's a whole 360 view. It's fantastic.
That must be great. Like, I love it. I would just nap up there all day.
Oh, I've slept up there when I've stayed with her before, and it's awesome.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All right, so everybody, I hope that you are ready and interested in this topic. I was fascinated by it, even as a young nerd. I love the young adult series, The Royal Diaries, and I don't know if any of you were a book reader in the early 2000s / late 90s. If you were, then you probably read these books.
So yeah, I've never read any of those.
Yeah, if you saw the covers, you might recognize it. If not, it's not really vital. They were historical fiction stories that covered important princesses and rulers through the lens of a fictitious diary.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, yeah, like the person never wrote a diary.
Oh, I have read these. We read these in school.
Right, yes, they were at school. They were bound, like hardback, bound in usually like gold, like...
Yeah, and they had that ribbon for your placeholder. Yes. Yep, I remember these very vividly.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't think I knew they were called the Royal Diaries.
I Googled. I was like, what the hell were those things called? Like, and of course, the first thing I Google is the Princess Diaries. So I'm like looking at Anne Hathaway and Julie Andrews.
Which is a fantastic movie.
Yeah, I'm not mad about it.
Kind of the same time period as when those came out.
It was not what I was looking for. So I had researched like young adult book series. And I'm like, oh, there it is. One of them, Cleopatra, Daughter of the Nile, was incredible and spurred my interest in ancient Egypt. And I beg your pardon for any rough pronunciations, but in my defense, all these names are from before the Common Era.
Yeah, we always do our best.
Yeah, we're trying. Before I start sharing the amazing collection, we should brush up on our Egyptian gods and goddesses, because we are going to hear their names come back quite a lot on all of these pieces. The first depicted goddess that we're going to discuss is Nut. She was the goddess of the sky and the heavens. She was usually depicted as a woman bent over earth with her head in the west and her feet in the east. She was sometimes depicted as a celestial cow. So, she was part of the cosmogony, a theory of the origin of the universe, Heliopolis, meaning city of the sun. Helios, the personified and deified form of the sun, was identified by the Greeks with the native Egyptian gods Ra and Atum, and their principal cults were located in the city. A little note here, too. When I use the word cults in this episode, that is just referencing different ancient Egyptian. It's almost like religions. And I'm not sure why the phrase cults has kind of endured. Maybe they were cults. Shout me out if you think they were cults. So the ancient Egyptians believed that Nut protected the earth deity Geb, her husband, from the night sky. Myths also state that the sun deity Ra traveled through her. She would swallow him at night and then gave birth to him every morning. Ra was then replaced by Thoth at night. She was often associated with coffins and sarcophagi because she protected the dead until they were reborn in the afterlife.
Oh, interesting.
Right? I definitely heard of the celestial cow because I've heard that term before and been like, what?
Mm-hmm.
So definitely heard of that part. The rest of this was new to me. The second that we're going to hear about is Nephthys, or Mistress of the House. She was the goddess of the air, since the sky is in the head of the world, and she was the head of the family.
Okay.
In Egyptian mythology, Nephthys was the daughter of Geb, earth, and Nut, sky. So the earth and the sky together give us Nephthys, mistress of the house. She is also the sister of Isis, who you all may know. She is sort of a very prolific Egyptian goddess who we'll talk about. Nephthys was the sister to Seth. She was Seth's sister and wife, so that's a little odd. But it's a different type, folks. It's real-life Targaryens. She was sister and wife to Seth and mother of Anubis. Although in some myths, Nephthys was barren. Therefore, she was associated with vultures, a bird which the Egyptians believed could not have children, and she was also associated with mourning.
Oh, interesting.
Nephthys helped Isis bring Osiris back to life after he was killed by Seth. Osiris is another god we're going to talk about, and he was killed by Seth. Nephthys helped Isis bring him back to life, so she is often depicted in tombs and on coffins as a protector of the dead, specifically associated with the organs that are placed in canopic jars. And if you don't know what a canopic jar is, it's literally just, I think we all know about ancient Egyptians pulling the brains out of people and that kind of stuff, like, ooh, spooky. Well, once they got those organs out, they would mummify them as well, and they would put them in a little jar called a canopic jar.
Interesting. I knew that they removed them, but I didn't know they were also mummified.
Canopic jars are where the mummified organs would go. Because I've learned through my research with Egypt, even though they take everything out, it's very much like a modern day funeral home where everything that they took out goes back into your sarcophagus. Mm-hmm. Same as like today, if they had to do something to your body afterward, they usually put your stuff back in your coffin for you. They do.
They're supposed to, at least. Yeah, there's a couple cases that maybe we'll cover at some point where I know that didn't happen, which have complicated the cases.
Yeah. And that's another reason why we should all take good care of our decedents and make sure that they are given the highest regard. Sometimes that doesn't happen. But in this case, the Egyptians were one to place a lot of value on this. And so Nephthys, Isis' sister, they look very similar, and they can only be differentiated by their headdresses, which I know is frustrating. But Nephthys is going to be shown with a basket on her head. However, she is also sometimes depicted as a hawk or a mourning woman. So you kind of have to use your context clues to see who they might be talking about if you're trying to read hieroglyphs one day. You know. One of the most important goddesses who we've already mentioned here is Nephthys' sister, Isis. She's very frequently pictured, and you may have heard of her. She was known as Great Mother Isis, the goddess of healing and magic. She was crucial to ancient Egyptian religious beliefs. She is known today by her Greek name Isis. However, the ancient Egyptians called her Aset. Her name translates to Queen of the Throne, which is reflected in her headdress, which is typically a throne. So you can take a peek for that. Sometimes she's also depicted with the vulture headdress of the goddess Mut, and other times with a disc with horns on the side attributed to the goddess Hathor. She took on their headdresses as she assimilated their traits. Isis can also be seen as a winged goddess who brought fresh air to the underworld when she went to meet her husband.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now we're going to go through the marriages again here. Yes, the marriages. Isis was the sister and wife of the god Osiris, ruler of the underworld. It is said that she and Osiris were in love with each other even in the womb.
Oh.
Which is yucky. But, again, it's another time. So I suppose at some point maybe somebody thought that was romantic.
Right.
But, boy, does that give me the ick. Isis was also the mother of Horus, and Horus was considered the protector of the pharaoh. The most famous story of Isis is the one we've already mentioned, where her sister is going to help her with her husband, Osiris. Because it begins when Seth, the jealous brother of Osiris, dismembered him and scattered the parts of his body throughout Egypt. The ancient sacred stories say that the other deities were so impressed with Isis's dedication to finding her beloved husband that they helped her revive him. Isis was very important to the ancient Egyptians because she had so many different powers. She was both the protector of women and the bringer of magic. She began as a secondary figure to her husband Osiris. However, after thousands of years of worship, she was transformed into the queen of the universe and the embodiment of cosmic order. By the Roman period, she was believed to control the power of fate itself.
It's interesting that, especially not with what you had just said with respecting all body parts, that they were scattered and how that is a sign in itself.
Yeah, it's considered just desecration. And we're going to talk a little bit here about Isis's husband, Osiris. We've talked about him in relation to both her and Nephthys. He is also frequently pictured in burial artifacts due to his position as god of the deceased. He was the son and oldest child of Geb, the earth deity, and Nut, the sky goddess. His wife and sister was Isis, who we just met. In the New Kingdom, Osiris was considered the master of the underworld, the next life, the afterlife. In the mythology, before becoming master of the afterlife, Osiris ruled Egypt and taught agriculture and gave laws and civilization to humans. However, Osiris's brother Seth was extremely jealous of him. So Seth killed Osiris and cut his body into pieces, which he distributed around Egypt. With Osiris dead, Seth became king of Egypt. with his sister Nephthys as his wife. Nephthys felt sorry for her sister Isis, who wept endlessly over her lost husband. Isis, who had great magical powers, decided to find her husband and bring him back to life long enough so that they could have a child together. With Nephthys, Isis roamed the country, collecting the pieces of her husband's body, reassembling them, and holding them together with linen wrappings. Isis breathed the breath of life into his body and resurrected him. They were together again, and soon afterwards Isis magically conceived a child, Horus. Osiris then descended into the underworld, where he became lord of that domain.
Interesting. There's so many brothers and sisters and husbands and wives.
Yeah, exactly. What for me helped keep me understanding who was who was just assuming that everybody is brother and sister.
That's basically what I'm getting at already.
Yeah, and then you'll eventually figure out, like, oh, wait, that was his son. And you're like, okay, well, I was close.
Right, you're still in the same general ballpark.
Right, I'm in the ballpark. As with any other culture or religion around the world, the Egyptians believed in paying respect to their dead. Therefore, they conducted elaborate ceremonies and mummification processes to help the deceased pass smoothly into the afterlife. Anubis was the deity who played an important role in this journey. Depicted with the black head of a jackal, Anubis helped mummify Egyptians when they died. Black represented the fertile soil of the Nile that was needed to grow yearly crops. So the Egyptians believed that the color black symbolizes good fortune and rebirth. I agree.
Interesting. A large majority of my wardrobe is black, so I'm okay with that.
I love black. I live for black. Jackals were associated with death because they lurked around the cemeteries and they would eat decomposing flesh. Yeah. Therefore, by making Anubis the patron deity of jackals, the Egyptians hoped to protect the bodies from being devoured.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, apparently it was a real problem. In addition, as recorded in the Book of the Dead, better known as the Book of Going Forth by Day, Anubis's other job was to stand in the Hall of the Two Truths and weigh the hearts of people seeking judgment. The human heart was balanced on the scale against Ma'at's feather of truth. If the heart weighed more than the feather, the person's identity would essentially cease to exist. The hybrid deity Amit would eat the heart and the soul would be destroyed.
Oh, well.
Yes, so very high stakes. But if the heart weighed the same as the feather, the deceased would pass through to the underworld, Duat, and into the afterlife. Since the Egyptians believed in the concept of Ma'at, which meant order, peace, and balance, death was regarded as importantly as life. For Anubis was a major part of the transition from life to death and back to life again.
Oh, that's very interesting. What if it's less than the feather?
You get your heart eaten. You're donezo. You want to be equal or higher, and then you're all good to go. But if you're not, if you're anything below, you basically are devoured and disappear, I suppose. And either way, you wouldn't reach what the Egyptians considered the afterlife or immortality if your soul was to be handled in this way.
Interesting.
Yeah, a little more about Ma'at. Ma'at was the goddess of truth, justice, balance, and most importantly, order. In paintings, she was depicted as a woman who is either sitting or standing with an ostrich feather on her head. And in some cases, she was depicted with wings. According to the creation myths, Ma'at was created when Ra arose from the waters of Nun. Nun here meaning chaos. Ma'at was often considered to be the daughter of Ra and was married to Thoth, god of wisdom. However, Ma'at was more than just a goddess to the ancient Egyptians. She represented the crucial concept of how the universe was maintained. The ancient Egyptians believed the universe had an order to it, and it was Ma'at who kept everything in balance with her scales. This helped the ancient Egyptians develop a strong sense of morality and justice. Ma'at was extremely important in achieving the goal of going to the afterlife. According to ancient Egyptian mythology, after the death of the body, everyone passes through the Hall of Judgment, where a person's heart is weighed on the scale against Ma'at's feather of truth. As we discussed, if the deceased person's heart balanced with Ma'at's feather, they could continue their journey to the afterlife. If not, their journey ended. This whole concept here, these stakes, influenced the daily actions of ancient Egyptians every single day. Because they believe this.
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah. If you're a fan of Led Zeppelin, you've already seen the feather of Ma'at, as the symbol was chosen by Robert Plant to represent himself on the band's untitled fourth album. The band members wanted to see if the record would still sell without the name Led Zeppelin on it, after lukewarm critical review on their album Led Zeppelin 3. So each member was tasked with picking a symbol to represent their role in the band. It has become Led Zeppelin's most well-known record, selling over 37 million copies worldwide.
It's a great record.
It's a fantastic record. And it is the feather inside the circle. And that is meant to be the feather of Ma'at, he said.
You and I can always bring it back to rock and roll in some way or another.
I sure can. You need me to bring it back around to Led Zeppelin? Because
Let's say, especially Led Zeppelin.
I'm really good. Yeah, like if we need to talk, I'm really good at it. And the last god that just comes up once, but we're going to mention him anyway, he's known as Hapi, and he was one of the 4 sons of the god Horus. His image was that of an ape, and his head was often used as a design on the lids of canopic jars, where the mummified, like we mentioned, where the mummified internal organs were placed. Hapi placed his protection over the lungs, while the other 3 sons each protected different internal organs.
Oh, okay.
If you've ever seen those little bottles that they end up pulling out of the tombs, and one has like a monkey head on it, and one has like a dog jackal head on it, and one has like an eagle on it, those are all canopic jars.
And they typically are for specific organs, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yes. So if you picked up a canopic jar and its lid had an ape on it, you could reasonably assume that those would be the lungs of the dead person.
Okay.
So fairly consistent. Really interesting stuff,
sense.
you know. Yeah, very. So that was our little review of the gods and goddesses who will come up, and I'll refresh your memory when we encounter them. Fairly consistent burial rites and rituals for so long. It's very fascinating to me because of course they vary, and it's fun. Like, it'll be fun taking you through what they have there now, because I know that you've also been to London and have maybe seen the collection yourself before.
Yeah, it's been a very long time, and I went for class, so we had very limited time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I need to get back to London and
absolutely
go back to the museums.
Yes, yeah. We had such limited time as well, but we were lucky enough to get to take in all of this Egyptian lore and see all of these incredibly rare and valuable artifacts that you're not going to see anywhere else. So I would love to just take y'all through the British Museum's Egypt display.
Yeah, I'm very excited because you added photos to our script, so I have a very good view of exactly what you're referring to. So I encourage everyone to go check out Instagram because they'll be on
Absolutely. There. Yes, I'm going to supply you guys with all of these images that I took. So they're not going to be photo studio quality. And of course, it was a very busy day and every school child in England was there. So if you see a whole bunch of people in the background, that's because they're literally my personal photos from my vacation.
It just makes it more fun.
Exactly. I had so much fun. I was tickled to death going through here. And the galleries displayed explored the ancient Egyptians' attitude to death and the afterlife. and the preparations that ensured the successful transition of the deceased from earthly life to immortality. Wall cases mounted all around the long room focused on equipping the dead through mummification, magic, and ritual. And the central case in the middle of the room illustrates the evolution of the main components of the burial and their changing relationship through time. The pieces we'll discuss are dated from between 2686 BC and AD 395. So, a very long time.
Right? Yeah.
These traditions carried on for, and very fascinating stuff. When you enter the British National Museum space, it truly has one of the most spectacular collections of sarcophagi I've ever seen.
Yeah, the room's kind of overwhelming when you walk into it.
It is. It's like you're standing in a room full of sarcophagi.
Yeah, you literally are.
I would guess at minimum there are 15 to 20 on display. Do you think that would be fair?
There's a good possibility things have changed because it's been over a decade since I've been there. So
okay, well, hopefully some of these pictures will give you a sense of the scale, because the only thing I can think to compare it to is if you were standing in a room where at least all the way down your left side, there are Christmas trees. That's how big these things are.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, because they're very large.
Yeah, they're just lining down the left-hand side, and like one after the other after another. Like it, I've seen one before, but there's not really in America. I mean, we don't have a collection like this. We don't have the abundance of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just remember walking in and just like feeling like there's no place you can look here without seeing something different.
Exactly. Like, I could have spent all day in there, but like I said, we had every school child in England there wandering around in their little ties and with their backpacks and just hitting me with their backpacks. And, I could have stayed in there all day, though.
Yeah, I think I had like an hour or two in the museum, and that was it. It was not enough time.
That sucks. We had a little bit of time, like enough time to take in sort of the high points, but I definitely would go back the next time we go, because we definitely skipped over stuff.
Hey, let's plan a trip to London.
Absolutely. So upon entering the Egypt wing in the museum, you first come upon the sarcophagus of Merimos. The mummy laid in the great stone chamber that is on display. However, what they have on display is the inner sarcophagus of Merimos. It was contained in two larger sarcophagi when discovered.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, so it was actually fairly common to have your sarcophagus contained in other, essentially larger sarcophagi. And this effect is called the cartonnage system, where just like what we said, you have interior layers of coffins. And Merimos was a, quote, king's son of Kush, a viceroy ruling the whole of conquered Nubia, then known as Lawat and Kush. Such officials were never true sons of the pharaoh, but they were subservient to him alone. So he's doing pretty well. He's got a leadership role here.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in office under Pharaoh Amenhotep III. So, and his responsibilities would have included enabling the construction of the king's great temple at Soleb. The temple's decoration shows Merimos attending Amenhotep's first regnal jubilee, the Sed festival. The casket is from the 18th dynasty during the reign of Amenhotep III, and that would be around 1390 to 1352 BC.
Okay, so that was fairly well into, because you said it started, what, 26?
2006, yeah, 2686 BC to AD 395.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're seated kind of in the middle there. And the sarcophagus was found in western Thebes in his tomb. So they found the tomb as well. And the stone, the inner casket is made of a deep, dark black stone called granodiorite. The stone is coarse-grained and is an igneous rock similar to granite. So this coffin was built to last.
It's just impressive, like, thinking about all of that, like, the tools and everything that they had to build all of that is so fascinating.
The stone, the whole surface of this thing, is covered in protective spells and figures of deities that cover the entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it had to be carved a lot.
Right.
I don't know when they must have started on it, but it had to have been before this guy was dead.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's so much work. And again, we'll have the images available for you guys on Instagram. But he's gotten incredibly, like, first of all the edges are completely rounded and smooth, which could really be due to time. Mm-hmm. But also the work on it is so intricate. Like, he's got a collar that runs across his neck with a beaded chain. He's got the long headdress on. And then they have a whole face carved out of there. So... And I did my research, and this stone is really hard.
Well, the fact that you can still see it all too now means that it's clearly built to last, and how incredibly tough it is.
Yeah.
There's a this kind of reminds me of just like this idea of like carving and how difficult that is. There's a really, really cool exhibit in Florence where they have the David. And what they have is all of the sculptures that were basically given up on. So they're like half sculpted, and it's down this hallway, and at the very end of the hallway is the David. And this is like that's what I think of when I think of carving like this, where it's like you see all these incredible things that are half finished.
Yeah. And also, I love that somehow.
Oh, it's so cool.
Because, like, I love sculpture, but, you know, when you see it, when you take it in a museum, you're getting, in my mind, when I see it, you're getting kind of like half of it. Because you're not really seeing the incredible painstaking work that was put into carving it. So... To get back to Mary Mouse, he's also got this really cool carved-in bottom on his casket. The sky goddess Nut spreads her wings on his chest. The goddess Nephthys protects the body at the head end, as does her sister Isis on the foot end. And the bands of inscription echo the bandages that enveloped the mummy when it was discovered. So, again, lots of really hard work gone into constructing this sarcophagus.
Absolutely.
And when it's next to you, it's like really big.
It's the size of a person.
Big. Yes, yeah. I was going to say, it's the size of maybe like a tall person, a small car. You know?
And like
it's long.
The average size of a person was a lot smaller back then. But you also have a lot of stone there. They're not thin.
No. And then you can imagine it was surrounded by two larger sarcophagi.
That's why I was surprised when you said it, because it's like, I know how big those are. And then to even have more layers of that.
Oh, it's huge. So as you keep going forward, before you've hit the hall proper, you're also going to run into the sarcophagus lid of Setau. It's the first sarcophagus example inside the displays, like in the windows. And he was a viceroy of Nubia for Ramses II. In the imagery, Setau assumes the pose of Osiris, god of the afterlife. His crossed hands clap a jed in his right and a tit in his left. These were symbols of permanence and life linked to Osiris and his consort Isis. On the lower portion of the sarcophagus lid, the sky goddess Nut protects his body with her wings. Some of the gods named in the texts are shown receiving Sitau's worship. Osiris, who is shown twice, the mummification god Anubis, and then also featured on Sitau's casket is the protector of the lungs named Hapi, who is depicted as a baboon-headed god. That leads me to think that potentially the person in this casket may have suffered from a lung ailment.
That's kind of what I was thinking too. Once you said the monkey head.
Yes, yeah, and it's carved into the lid of the sarcophagus, which is pretty prime real estate as far as your afterlife goes. Mm-hmm. So I imagine that maybe you would put whatever you're struggling with there first.
Right.
That would be my guess, because a lot of these sarcophagi we'll go through, they do not typically depict Hapi. So my thought is perhaps the person had a lung ailment. At the foot of Sitau's sarcophagus lid, Isis and Nephthys mourn. The piece is from the 19th dynasty under the reign of Ramses II, putting it in a time window of 1279 to 1213 BC. This sarcophagus found in Thebes, most specifically in Dra Abu el Naga, in the tomb that was intact. And it's another imposing specimen, given that it is made of a dark granite.
That just blows my mind, because we use granite for countertops. Exactly. It's made to be so hard and
tough. Yeah, we keep granite around so that we can, smack our counters with the meat tenderizer and it won't fall off.
Right.
And
they are porous. You have to be careful with them, but it's hard.
Right. It's really hard to crack that granite. It's another very large piece and obviously is made to contain the body of a fully grown human. So that in itself makes it very big. But speaking of me saying human, we're going to talk a little bit about pets. The ancient Egyptians didn't just believe people deserved the dignity of mummification at death. In fact, the British Museum has an incredible collection of creatures that have been mummified. Animals were viewed not only as pets, but as incarnations of gods. As such, the Egyptians buried millions of mummified cats, birds, and other creatures at temples honoring their deities.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking at Rigby right now.
Yes, he's a little Bastet. She was the cat goddess, and she's an example of one such deity. So at her temples, you would typically find mummified cats. And the British Museum has such a good collection of different types of cats, but not as good as in 1888, an Egyptian farmer digging in the sand near Astable Antar discovered a mass grave of felines, ancient cats that were mummified and buried in pits in great numbers.
Wow. Imagine just stumbling on that.
I cannot imagine that. I'd be like, this is the worst day of my life. What is happening? I would not know what to do, because you're just going out to farm and all of a sudden you've got potentially hundreds of thousands of mummified cats.
In 1888, it's not like you can
what
look
on
up
earth do you do?
history or anything.
Yeah, exactly. Why are there dead cats in my backyard? You can't look that up. And then why are there hundreds of thousands of dead cats in my backyard?
That's just so sad. They're honoring them, but it's sad.
Exactly. They're it's so sweet and also not so sweet. We'll get on to it.
Oh no.
But because of the sheer scale of animal mummy production, many archaeologists thought the vast majority were churned out in a relatively slipshod fashion. But a new study in the well-respected Nature Science magazine suggests the mummification techniques ancient Egyptians used on animals were often as elaborate as those they employed on the best-preserved human corpses.
They deserve it.
Exactly. And throughout the history of ancient Egypt, animals were highly respected. In no other culture have animals been as influential in so many aspects of life, nor has any culture depicted animals so often in their artwork or writing. It's estimated that 2 in every 4 or 5 Egyptian hieroglyphs relates to animals.
I guess I have never really noticed that, but thinking back on it, yeah, there aren't many others.
It's very sort of animal based. They had a very good relationship with them. They believed that animals were crucial to both physical and spiritual survival.
I agree.
Vital to physical survival because they were a major source of food, and to spiritual survival based on how well a person treated animals during their life on Earth.
Yeah, that's like, if someone's not treating their pet right, it's a sign.
You know
it's a sign.
It's red flag. That's a huge red flag. Some animals were considered to be literal incarnations of deities, and therefore it's understandable why Egyptians would have wanted to hold such animals in the highest regard, giving them a proper burial through mummification. That's what they believed was the most important part of this. That's sort of your key to get to eternity. Step 1 is get mummified. You have to be mummified.
Right.
So they're honoring these creatures by mummifying them. And we've spoken a lot about Ma'at, but we're going to get even more specific here. In order to determine a person's admittance or denial to the afterlife, the deities would ask a series of judgment questions. One of these crucial questions would be whether they had mistreated any animals during their life on Earth.
Good question.
Isn't that lovely? I love that.
Everyone take care of your pets.
Yes, please take care of your puppies. Because of this religious belief, the killing of an animal was considered a serious crime, punishable by death.
I don't disagree. Like, that's extreme. I admit that. But crimes against animals should be punishable.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you should have to own that. And somebody had to, because it was observed by Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian from the 1st century BC. He witnessed the lynching of a Roman man who had accidentally killed a cat during a visit to Egypt.
Oh.
Yeah, so it was very serious.
It was not taken lightly.
No, not at all. And understandably, this punishment frightened many Egyptians to the point that if one would happen upon a dead animal, they would flee from it as to avoid the accusation of being its killer.
I think that's an understandable reaction.
I do too. It's sort of like if you found a human body.
Right? Yeah.
You know, you might be compelled to run away from it.
In reality, you should call that in, but I understand it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, in reality, call it in. Yeah, call it in. But also, they're sort of showing us the problem of finding a body, except it's a cat.
And they didn't have phones back then, so I get it.
Yeah. So long before animal mummies were used as religious offerings, animals in Egypt were occasionally mummified for a more personal reason, as beloved pets that were to keep the deceased company in the afterlife.
Aww. That's sweet.
Many Egyptians loved their pets. Isn't that sweet? And the customary process of mourning the loss of a loved pet included crying and shaving one's eyebrows.
Okay.
Which I'm here to tell you, if something happens to Arthur, I'm going to do.
Shaving eyebrows is interesting, but again, I get it. I love my cat. I would do anything for him.
If that was what was expected of me, I would do it tomorrow.
Right.
I'll buzz them right off. They'll grow back. They'll probably be weird, but that's fine.
Yeah,
I miss my dog. Yeah, exactly. And ancient Egyptian pets were given names, just like they are today. A fact evidenced by more than 70 names deciphered in inscriptions identifying pet dog mummies.
Oh.
Yeah. Egyptians believed that mummification was imperative in order to gain admittance to the afterlife. And therefore the belief was that mummification of these pets would ensure the animal's immortality.
Understandable.
Yeah, exactly. like we talked about a little before, cats were mummified as religious offerings in enormous quantities and were believed to represent the war goddess Bastet. The ancient Egyptians took cats extremely seriously. If you didn't catch that from before, when the guy got lynched for killing a cat.
Again, I get it. I'm staring at Rigby right now. He's really cute. He makes me happy.
Yes. And you're like, he could be a god. He knows what's going on.
I don't know if he knows what's going on, but
I don't
he
know
thinks he's a
going
god. He thinks he's in charge of everything and rules the world.
Yes. The cult of Bastet was primarily centered at Thebes and Beni Hassan, beginning in the Ptolemaic period. In addition, thousands of cat mummies have been found at the catacombs of Saqqara. Cats who were bred to become offerings of this type usually died due to strangulation or the breaking of their necks.
Oh.
I know, it's sad.
That's very sad.
Yeah. During mummification, the cat bodies would be dried and filled with soil, sand, or some other kind of packing material. And they were either positioned with their limbs folded closely to their bodies or in a sitting, lifelike position. The wrapping was usually completed through intricate geometric patterns. Early in the development of animal mummification, cat mummies were placed in little bronze or wooden sarcophagi. More expensive mummies were typically adorned with features drawn in black paint and colored glass, obsidian, or rock crystal eyes. The museum's collection houses many cat mummies, one of a bird, and even one of a fish.
Oh, wow. Yeah, looking at the pictures that you put.
Yeah.
And it is very interesting how they're all so different from each other.
Yeah, and I'll point to you and I'll tell you all on Instagram that if you look at the cat mummy on the top shelf all the way to the right with that sort of up and down key pattern woven onto it, you can see the eyes that have been given to it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's got little, like, I've got a better picture of it, too. It's got some sort of colored glass or something like that in there for its eyes. So we know that that one was a more expensive mummy, you know? Yeah. Another interesting and beautifully preserved piece is the coffin of an unidentified young woman. The museum has kept it in remarkable condition, with the white of the coffin meticulously preserved, and almost all of its original paint is intact.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. And the front of the coffin represents the dead girl dressed in classical costume. Her long cream-colored tunic has black stripes, or clavi, and a woven black H motif on the right sleeve. A pink mantle with green edging is worn over the tunic. The feet are represented wearing black thong sandals. A wreath is placed over the hair, and earrings, which are now lost, were originally able to be inserted into holes in the ears on the casket.
Oh, wow.
I know, right? I was like, wow, that's like, what an interactive experience.
So, yeah, I'm looking at this photo, and it's very detailed.
Right? Yeah, it's very well taken care of. Like, I wonder how it was recovered. I don't believe, I think they're just using it as an example of sort of the everyday costume an Egyptian would wear. But I'm wondering where this one was discovered and under what conditions that it stayed this well preserved.
Right. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, very interested in that. And so on her wrists, on both of them, there are snake bracelets painted on. And in the left hand are two sprigs, perhaps thought to be myrtle. In front of the feet, protruding out from the body, it's sort of elongated, is an inverted scene in Egyptian style, showing the winged solar disk from which emerges human arms holding tally sticks, and the hieroglyphic sun Ankh, signifying life. And if you think you haven't seen an Ankh before, you absolutely have. They are at every sort of strange shop you go into, every shop that you go into that you're like, it's kind of weird in here. But it's also at like Spencer's Gifts.
Right.
And it is the circle with, it sort of looks like the traditional Christian cross, except on the top of it is a long oval coming out of the vertical piece. So you've definitely seen an Ankh before. And this one is painted on her coffin here. And the group is probably to be interpreted as a promise of eternal life through the power of the sun god. The sides of the coffin are decorated with figures of Egyptian deities arranged in registers. So in little lines on either side down her coffin. So, and again, a marvel of like hand carving.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So now we're going to talk about a ritual that came with every death and mummification. It is called the opening of the mouth. And it sounds much more graphic and terrifying than it is, I promise. Because when I first saw that, I was like, oh, say what? But it was the most important of the rituals performed at the funeral ceremony of an ancient Egyptian. It originated as a ritual to endow statues with the capacity to support the living spirit. And it was adapted to restore to the corpse its bodily faculties. The ritual enabled the deceased to pass into the afterlife, seeing, hearing, breathing, and able to receive nourishment to sustain the ka, or soul. So they really believed, that you were aware of everything in the afterlife, as long as these specific tasks were carried out.
Right, like this gives you basically the best chance to live a similar life, it sounds like, within your afterlife.
Right. Exactly. Only forever. Immortality. So that's, again, those are the stakes. So the mummy was placed upright at the entrance to the tomb, and a series of ritual acts was carried out, accompanied by the recitation of the liturgy. Purifications and offerings similar to those performed in temple rites were enacted. The most important episodes involved the priest touching the mouth of the mummy mask with a chisel, an adze, which is an item similar to an axe with a curved blade at the right angle to the handle. They would touch other implements to the mummy mask's mouth. And by doing this, they felt they were then restoring these faculties of the corpse symbolically.
Oh, interesting.
For the afterlife. Yeah. Another one that's performed at any ancient Egyptian funeral is called the offering ritual. And the offering ritual provided the setting for the nourishment of the ka in the tomb. Again, that means that's soul there. Actual food and drink were laid on the offering table, but these were only symbols of the life-giving force of food and were later removed and consumed by priests or by the deceased's family. The most crucial part of the offering ritual was the uttering of a special magical spell known as, quote, offering which the king gives, end quote. This spell enabled the deceased to receive the benefit of the offerings presented by the king to the gods in the cult temples. So very much like a modern day church where you're performing the ritual of praying, and this is how that god or this person in immortality is going to link back up with you.
Right.
Is going to hear you. And the reciprocal relationship is reflected in the standard wording of the formula. It goes a little something like this. Quote, an offering which the king gives to Osiris, so that he may give a voice offering consisting of 1,000 fowl, 1,000 oxen, and every good and pure thing on which a god lives. The ka of, insert decedent's name, here, end quote. So that's sort of, I guess you could say, the prayer, the spell. You know, it's strange the way this is kind of referred to, as we'll hear the word spell come up a lot here, but in terms of placing it within their religion, it would be sort of maybe the same as a prayer or a hymn or a Hail Mary.
Yeah, it's not a spell in like our modern day aspect of a spell.
So it's a little odd that they refer to them as spells. I don't know. Maybe they were written that way specifically, or maybe they're written somewhere else that they should be referred to as such. I don't know. But I think it would be easier to say to people, so this is essentially like a Hail Mary.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a well-trod prayer that you would repeat over and over. And each time this formula was pronounced, the deceased received a further supply of the offerings named in that. So, as we just said, 1,000 fowl, 1,000 oxen, every good and pure thing on which a god lives. So every time you repeat this, they believed you're giving this person more offerings.
Right. Okay.
The text was inscribed in the tomb, on statues, stelas, or other monuments in temples or sacred sites, where priests or other literate persons might see them and recite them.
So it's trying to get people to say it so they get more out of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And another thing that was really common were funerary amulets. And amulets were extensively used in both daily life and for the benefit of the dead, from pre-dynastic times to the Roman period. They were believed, as they are today, to confer protection against harm or danger, and to equip the wearer with divine powers or attributes. Their effectiveness resided in their shape, their color, and the material of which they were made. Also, the ritual acts and speeches which accompanied their use. We may even wear some of these amulets today. A lot of the amulets are of the eye.
I'll say I have a evil eye on my purse that goes with me everywhere.
And I love the imagery of the scarab. And the scarab is actually very commonly an amulet given to the deceased or worn in life. And in my husband's collection, he actually has a couple Egyptian amulets.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'll have to look next time I'm over there.
Yeah, I'll show you. We actually have a linen wrapping from a mummy as well. I feel like I need to
go through your collection as if it were a museum, like go through and like analyze everything, because you guys have a lot of stuff. Yeah.
We have my house is very weird, you guys. I love it. Y'all. I usually have to warn folks before they come over, like, hey, just so you know, my house is a little weird. But I love it. I love it so much. There's no rhyme or reason to the collection, but a lot of it is morbid, macabre stuff that I have frittered back to our home and my husband puts up with. And then the things that he collects are often very interesting old pieces. He prefers these pieces that are actually sort of archaeological finds. And he actually speaks with a couple archaeologists who are well vetted online, and they send him, they have a reciprocal relationship. And
that's awesome.
So he prefers stuff that old. Like, he really likes it. And I understand, because it's very fascinating, just feeling like you're holding a part of history, It's very interesting. And sometime soon we'll have to, I'll rattle off for y'all some other pieces. But for now, we have mummy wrappings that are attached to a bracelet of lapis lazuli. It's very cool.
Oh, that is very cool.
So the amulets, some of these texts were incorporated into the books Coffin Texts and the Book of the Dead. And they were sometimes inscribed on the amulets themselves. Some amulets were used for both the living and the dead. Others were purely for the tomb. Funerary amulets were placed on the mummified body before wrapping began, and also between the layers of the wrappings. Their position on the body was often directly related to the function which they were intended to fulfill. Items of jewelry also incorporated amulets. In some cases, such as the wasit collar, they could themselves provide protection.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and they would find, in my research, I came across, they would just find these mummies who were just lousy with amulets. They would be all over the body, but each one was placed very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so interesting because the coup de grace of this collection is a fully preserved, still wrapped mummy of an unidentified man. He was wrapped in a painted and inscribed shroud and provided with small amulets of gilded wood threaded on a frame.
Wow.
Yeah, the frame sits on the mummy's chest in the display, and they had reenacted all of the places these amulets were found within the mummy, and it's still laid on the chest so you can see them. And these inscribed discs were called hypocephaly. They were usually made of plastered linen and less frequently of papyrus or other materials, but the bulk of them were plastered linen. And they were placed beneath the heads of mummies during the late period and the Ptolemaic era. The texts written on them are taken from spell 162 of the Book of the Dead and were intended to provide life-giving heat to ensure the resurrection of the dead. Images of deities connected with the notions of creative power and renewed life supplemented the potency of the texts. Funerary amulets were consistently placed on the body or the mummy between the 13th to the 18th dynasties. In the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, the amulets would be found scattered throughout the body. The amulets mentioned here are just a few that have been consistently found on mummies. In addition, there would also be tokens of food, jewelry, or other valuables buried with the mummies that would serve them in their afterlife.
Interesting.
And now we brought it up a couple times here, so we, good people, are going to do a reading from the Book of the Dead. As stated, "Hail, Father Osiris, I shall possess my body forever. I shall not be corrupted. I shall not disintegrate, nor will I fall prey to worms. I exist. I am alive. I am strong. I have awoken and am at peace. There is no destruction in my organs or in my eyes. My head has not been removed from my neck. My body is permanent. It will not perish. It will not be destroyed in this eternal land."
Oh, interesting. And like,
Yes.
it makes sense, like what they're saying here. But it's very
Right.
interesting how they're like, this will not happen. Like, I'm doing
Right.
everything I can.
Exactly. It was imperative. Like, the entire thought of your afterlife was based around this. And I think, again, it's worth mentioning how much this sort of is about the protection of the body and the keeping of the corpse handled with a reverence rather than, a wasteful energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Book of the Dead was on a roll of papyrus, just copied by scribes, people who were literate. And it was on a roll of papyrus placed in the coffin with the deceased. It contained, quote, spells to help guide and protect the deceased to their journey into the afterlife. The hieroglyphics had scenes that had depicted a, quote, map of the afterlife, so they could find the way to the kingdom of the blessed. The Book of the Dead didn't appear until the New Kingdom, and it is a combination of spells from the coffin texts, which were inscribed on the walls of the Middle Kingdom sarcophagi, and the pyramid texts, which were engraved on the walls of the chamber tombs in the royal pyramids dating back as far as the 5th dynasty. There are different versions of the Book of the Dead, and no single papyrus contains every spell. There are other funerary books, Book of Gates, the Book of Caverns, and the Book of Duat, Kingdom of the Dead, and what it contains. But these texts were believed to be reserved for royalty.
Interesting. I didn't realize that the Book of the Dead wasn't always consistent.
Right, yeah. So your Book of the Dead that's placed with you in your casket would likely be different from, say, Ramses's Book of the Dead. He would have, these fancier ones that we've just mentioned here, like the Book of Duat and what it contains, and Duat meaning the Kingdom of the Dead. So the royalty were even going into the afterlife better prepared.
Right, which not really any surprise there.
No, not really much surprise there. And we're going to move on to Shabtis, which were your servants for the afterlife. The ancient Egyptian idea of the afterlife included the possibility that the dead may have to carry out agricultural labor.
Which kind of just makes sense with the time.
Right. The eternity is very similar to what you're currently living. However, this prospect of agricultural labor could be avoided by having small mummy-shaped figures of the deceased known as Shabti, Shavabdi, or Ushabti. These figures, made of stone, wood, faience, pottery, and sometimes bronze, would magically perform work on behalf of their owner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you would bring your people with you to the afterlife, so you didn't have to go cut the fields or anything. These were your folks. And they were a regular fixture of tomb equipment from the Middle Kingdom to the Ptolemaic period. And that is about 2000 to 30 BC. So a large period there.
So that's a lot of time. That's most of what you mentioned earlier, the 2600 something to what, 300 something AD?
Yes, yeah. So this, used an incredibly large amount of the time. And again, just very fascinating, consistent rituals that lasted for so long. Super interesting. And originally, the Shabti acted as a substitute for its owner, but it later came to be regarded more as a servant. And its character as an agricultural laborer was highlighted by the representation of tools held in the hands of these small carved Shabti. The magical spell which ensured the proper functioning of the Shabtis was frequently inscribed on the figurines. The number of Shabtis per burial gradually increased from 1 or 2 to 401.
Oh, wow.
Yes, yeah. So the reason there were this many is this total comprised 365 worker Shabtis, one assigned for every day of the year, and 36 overseers to control each team of 10 figures. If you really wanted to go into the afterlife with style, you had to have 401 Shabtis. Which means it's a lot of work. Earlier, the Shabtis were often large and finely carved, but later, the increase in the quantity brought a corresponding decline in the size and the quality of them.
Yeah, I'm looking at this photo and I'm wondering, how tall are they?
They're about the size of your palm, kind of on the lower end, and on the higher end, they went all the way up. You can see on the lowest area there, they would go all the way up to be the size of maybe like a small desk lamp.
Okay.
And yeah, the smaller finely carved ones are, I would say, maybe 5 to 6 inches tall. And they sort of range in that area, but these ones that are like the 401, they're very small.
Oh, they have to be to fit in there.
Yeah, we're gonna link you guys up once again on the Instagram with the pictures, because I do have pictures of the smaller Shabtis. And yeah, they were 401 of them. So yeah, they were tinier and there was less detail, less represented on the Shabti itself.
And I'm not a social media person, so I don't know. This might end up being multiple posts. Don't we have a limit of how many
Oh,
pictures?
yeah. Oh,
So yeah,
yeah.
you'll
It's going to
keep an eye out for
be,
multiple.
yeah, keep an eye out for multiple posts because I do think that we get limited to about 10 images.
That's what I thought, but I don't use social media. So
Yeah, I think we're limited to about 10 images. So I'll probably be doing maybe 2 posts, maybe 3 posts. It depends
yeah,
because
well,
there's a
you'll
lot of
see.
interesting stuff.
I'm fascinated right now. I feel like I'm back in a college class and I love it.
Right, it's super interesting. And I guess that's why every school child in Britain was there.
Right.
It must be nice. Like, you could just wake up and go see, like, this incredible collection of stuff that is just so, so old. We just don't have that in America, you know?
Right, exactly. Like we have some great museums here, especially in
Oh,
Chicago,
yeah.
but
Oh, absolutely.
nothing that compares to this.
There's definitely stuff to see. There's interesting older pieces that are very cool, that date back, because our country was always occupied with Native Americans. So there are very cool artifacts from way back when, but
Oh,
not
absolutely.
so far back as this. This
Hmm.
is way, way, way back when.
And that's a big reason I chose to study abroad because I did art. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just, you can't find that sort of history in the States. Like there are pockets
Yeah.
of it,
Yeah.
absolutely, but as a whole.
Yeah. Steeped in other areas where here, I mean, there are very cool art museums here. There is
Oh,
really
absolutely.
interesting stuff.
The Art Institute here is fantastic. I
Oh, it's
love going to the Art
incredible. Yeah.
Institute.
Yeah, the Chicago Art Institute, if y'all are ever in town, head it up. It's great. They've got American Gothic there, the man and woman farmers standing in front of their
Hmm.
house. They have that.
Yeah,
They
and they have
also have
my favorite, which I have on my wall, is Nighthawk.
Night. Yeah, I was gonna say Nighthawks, right? Yeah, it's the
Hmm.
painting you guys may have seen of it. It sort of looks like an empty-ish diner with like a couple people in it, and it's got a little glow on it. It's very cool. And once you've seen it, you would probably remember seeing the painting or seeing like a meme that is made with the
So there's a
painting
lot
as the
of different
background.
depictions of it. Yup.
Yeah. It proliferates, so it's a fun one to go see too. And yeah, the whole building is just great, but it just doesn't carbon date to this long ago.
Exactly.
And now, one of the cooler things as you keep moving through the galleries, I've only probably covered like the first third of the galleries.
Yeah, there's so much there.
Yeah, there's so much. And so as you move past this sort of 1/3 mark, you're going to see in the central area where they mentioned that they like to show the process of burial and how it changed the times and all that. As you pass sort of this 1/3 mark, you're going to see the first example of gilding in an ancient Egyptian coffin, in the painted and gilded mummy case of a young girl. However, the case appears to be made of mud underneath that gold.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is plastered on the outside and whitewashed in the interior. So then gilded over that. Very interesting. An interesting one. Because the painted decoration reproduces typical features of the trappings of a mummy of the Ptolemaic period. It shows what they call a bead net painting technique on her mantle there, the garment outside her outfit, but also even in the hair, you can just see sort of the cross hatching of dots.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they mean by the bead net. And then it has a gilded mask, a large collar with falcon head terminals, and cartonnage plaques. And the feet are represented wearing sandals. And this one is actually a much smaller one. In my picture, which I'm going to share with you guys, you can see there's a full-size man standing next to it. And you can tell that this one is sort of smaller.
Yeah, it looks like it's maybe, 3 feet tall?
Yeah, I would say 3 or 4. I think maybe
Yeah, it's kind of
4.
hard to tell because the person's in the background. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely not like a average size adult.
No. Yeah, it's much smaller. So, which is why I think they believe they can confidently say it was a younger girl because it's so small. Another, oh gosh, really fascinating. It's of the mummy and coffins of the priest Hornegetef. It's another encounter with gilding in the collection, and it looks very like the traditional gold mask that you would associate with ancient Egypt. It's most famously worn by King Tut. This gilded mummy and the set of coffins belong to a priest, Hornegetef. CAT scan images were taken of this mummy, which I think is fascinating.
Right.
And these CAT scans showed that Hornegetef was a mature adult at the time of his death. They could see arthritic changes in the lumbar vertebrae and signs of osteoporosis in the skull on the scans, which are consistent with being a relatively advanced age. So he lived a good long life.
So interesting that they can still tell all of that through CAT scans.
Oh yeah, very interesting. And I put the image in here I put for you.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, you can see the CAT scans, which are very interesting, but I cheated you out of a picture of the mask. It's sort of very similar to King Tut's, a full face gilded mask.
I'll have to check out our Instagram.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say I'll put it on Instagram, and he has the full face done, and very much in the style, like the eye sort of looks like the evil eye, and the forearms are crossed over the upper abdomen, sort of, how exactly you would picture a mummy to be.
Mm-hmm.
And after the removal of the brain, the skull was partially filled with fluid, probably a molten resin, which had solidified in the rear of the cranial cavity while the corpse was lying on its back. The CAT scans also revealed 4 large packages visible within the thorax and the abdomen. And these packages are probably the liver, the lungs, the stomach, and intestines, all replaced in the body by the embalmers.
Okay, so that's what we were talking about before.
Yeah, you basically, everything that gets taken out does sort of get put back in, unless it's in a canopic jar.
Do the canopic jars themselves get put back in?
Yes, they get put in your
Okay, that's
tomb.
what I thought.
Not inside your sarcophagus, but it would be sort of right, it would be right near you.
Okay.
Yeah, and unless I might be wrong, I'm pretty sure that they don't go in the sarcophagus, they go in the tomb. The wooden chest designed to hold the internal organs contains only pottery fragments wrapped in linen and was included out of respect for tradition.
Okay.
So, yeah, this one is probably a little further on. They've just included the traditional box for the internal organs as a nod to the standard, even though the internal organs have been replaced inside the mummy.
Right.
The radiographs also reveal the presence of a large number of amulets distributed over the neck and chest, rings on one finger and on one toe, and a pair of bangles around the ankles. Hornegetef's massive outer coffin is of mummiform shape with a pedestal to support the feet, which is an element usually restricted to the inner coffins before the Ptolemaic period. The decoration consists of traditional images of deities and extracts from the Book of the Dead. Coffins were closely linked, again, with sky goddess Nut, a figure of whom is painted on the interior of Hornegetef's sarcophagus. This identifies the dead man with Osiris, the son of Nut, and locates him symbolically within the womb of the goddess, ready to experience rebirth. The inner coffin, with decoration applied directly to the wood, is painted and richly gilded. A pectoral appears in the center of the collar, And below that is a winged scarab beetle. The sons of Horus and the goddesses Isis and Nephthys flank a central inscription, which includes chapter 72 of the Book of the Dead, a spell to enable the deceased to leave the tomb and enjoy the pleasures of the afterlife.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, on the interior of the lid is painted an image of Newt, representing the sky stretching above the mummy and surrounded by depictions of the stars and constellations.
Oh, that sounds cool.
Yes, it's very cool. I'll probably put up a couple for this one, just so you guys can see the very interesting, it almost seems like an individual thing that's so, everyone's eternity is sort of in their own hands. They're sort of individually tailored,
Mm-hmm.
Like, which goddess did you most identify with in life? Okay, we'll put that over here. It's very interesting. And also the presence of the winged scarab beetle is very cool, because I'll attach another image of that as well on the Instagram and around us. But the scarab can be depicted with either its wings shut or its wings open. And much more common is the scarab with the wings shut. I imagine because the winged one may be a little more fragile, maybe if fewer of them survived. But that's sort of the beautiful open-winged insect that you typically see, when you Google scarab.
Mm-hmm.
And in a final beautiful example of gilding, we have the gilded Rishi coffin of King Antef the Sixth. Yes, King Antef the Sixth from the 17th dynasty, and it's from about 1600 BC. It's also from Western Thebes, same area, Dra Abu el Naga. The king's mummified body is covered with a feather design. So the design is called Rishi in Arabic, because this feather design is symbolizing the protective wings of the funerary goddesses Isis and Nephthys. Both are named in spells inscribed down the middle of the coffin and under the king's feet. The reign of Antef VI is relatively well documented, but his dynasty's realm was confined to southern Egypt. The area we would call northern Egypt was controlled by the Hyksos kings, descendants of the Asiatic migrants. So this is from before they have even taken control of the area, which would be called Upper Egypt back then.
Okay.
And I think it's very fascinating that we have a mummy of a king here. That is very cool.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
As you keep going, the next one that you run into it's a mummy case from Aswan. The Aswan mummy case was found in 1907 in a tomb on El Hessa Island near Aswan. They think this mummy case probably belonged to a priest who worked in the nearby temple of Philae. The tombs cut into the rock at El Hessa were discovered during the Egyptian government's first archaeological survey of Nubia. Directed by the American archaeologist George A. Reisner, who lived from 1867 to 1942, the survey involved the excavation of ancient sites threatened by an enlargement of the Aswan Dam. So this is one where we're trying to preserve history. We've got to get that stuff out of there or it's all going to get flooded out.
Right. So work fast, but be careful.
Right. Exactly. Preserve. It's not a scenario where you get, in the Victorian era, they literally had parties that were unwrapping parties. And it would be looted mummies from tombs, and they literally would just unwrap them. And that would be your evening. Yeah, I was like, that's so nasty.
Sounds so disrespectful.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the Victorian era, I'm like, yeah, that seems about the time they would be doing that.
Yeah.
very strange times. They don't have phones or anything to do besides getting themselves into a lot of trouble with the afterlife. They'll go around unwrapping people. Would you want someone to unwrap you? Like,
right? Yeah, just respect the tradition.
Exactly. Leave their stuff alone. Don't unwrap them. But in this scenario, it was very much preservation focused. And the style of the mummy, the Aswan mummy, in the case, it dates it to the Ptolemaic period, which was 305 to 30 BC. There were 2 stone coffins in Tomb 91B, one containing a carefully wrapped body in the painted case. This case was sold by the Cairo Museum in 1915, and for many years it was part of a different collection before moving to its current resting place at the British Museum. The cartonnage mummy case consists of 2 halves, like an ancient wooden coffin. The front and back were joined with pieces of wood and secured with pegs. The images painted on the British Museum's cartonnage mummy of an unknown man include a winged scarab beetle, a goddess, and the god Anubis mummifying the body. Along the sides are rows of protective deities. On the left side of the deceased, a bearded man is dressed in white, and he kneels to adore the gods. More deities are painted on the back of this sarcophagus. So an incredible amount of work was put into this, and a lot of the paint has held up. And it is the whole room when you walk in there, the lights are even dimmed. Because, of course, all this stuff is so fragile that even direct sunlight could cause, fallout of the color.
I know a lot of museums have, a no-flash policy for photos and things.
Yeah, which was in effect here, so that's why nothing has flashes on it, and you can see my reflection in all of these pictures. Because no flash allowed, it degrades the color and potentially harms the antique. The hieroglyphic inscriptions are repeated groups of signs seemingly without a connected meaning. They were probably painted by a craftsman who could not read. The mummified man's name is not recorded.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so we have a ton of artifacts from his burial. We just don't have his name, which is odd. When we just talked about how individualized each of these afterlives were, typically that would include the name of the decedent. But this one has been lost to time. We have another, as we move through here, the coffin for the reburial of King Mycerinus. So, Mycerinus, also known as Menkaura, was the builder of the third pyramid at Giza, about 2500 BC. The first modern explorers of the pyramid were led by Colonel Richard Howard Vyse. In 1837, they discovered the remains of a mummiform wooden coffin in the antechamber of the pyramid. The hieroglyphic carved text on the lid promises the protection of the goddess Nut to the deceased king Mycerinus. The shape of the coffin, with a pedestal beneath the feet, and the wording of the inscription would date it to around the 25th or 26th dynasties, which would be about 747 to 525 BC. It indicates that the burial of Mycerinus was restored in that period. And a cult of the deceased king was reestablished at about the same time that his mummiform and coffin was restored. These activities can be related to the contemporary widespread interest in the great eras of Egypt's past. Human remains found near the coffin, and once thought to be those of the king himself, have been shown by carbon dating to belong to an intrusive burial of the medieval period.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that fascinating?
That is really interesting.
Yeah, in the Great Pyramids, they found the body of an intrusive medieval person, wandered in there and died. and now is enjoying eternity with Mycerinus, even confusing the scientists into thinking it may have been him. And now we talked a little bit about tomb robberies, and now that we've just discussed reburials, let's go into it a little more. Tomb robbery in Egypt occurred at all periods and affected burials at all levels of society. It was particularly prevalent at times of economic stress or when the weakening of centralized government led to inadequate protection of cemeteries. Makes sense, right?
Right.
You want the valuable stuff in there. The best documented outbreak of tomb robberies occurred in the 20th dynasty, which is about 1185 to 1070 BC. And it affected the royal and private tombs of the New Kingdom at Thebes. Official records written on papyrus survive, detailing the inspection of the tombs and the trials and confessions of the robbers, most of whom were local craftsmen or minor temple officials. Those found guilty were condemned to death. Although tomb robbery was regarded as a serious offense, in practice, the reuse of tombs and recycling of burial goods was frequent. At the end of the 20th dynasty, about 1100 BC, the burials of the New Kingdom rulers and their families were officially dismantled. Precious metals, jewelry, and other valuables were appropriated to support the weak economy, and the mummies were deposited in collective burial places.
It's interesting. Like, I get it. It makes sense.
It does make sense, but it sort of flies in the face of everything else, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Like, oh man, like, I understand you're running out of room. Not everybody can have a pyramid. But you would think if anyone would be left intact and unbothered, it would be the royal family. But no, apparently it was common enough that you just turned that shit around and hucked whatever you needed to. I mean, it makes sense if you're not able to, if it's gotten to a point in the economy where you're not able to feed your family, you know, you might break up the tomb of the king, I suppose.
Right.
And we're going to take a brief dalliance here into sort of disease and disorder. The museum's collection houses an incredible display of skeletons from the time, and it gives us a window into what ancient Egyptians may have been struggling with as far as disease. Notably, leprosy in the Nile Valley. Now, leprosy primarily affects the skin and peripheral nervous system. Long-term infection and the loss of sensation caused by nerve damage can lead to the gradual destruction of bones, particularly in the hands and the feet. The bacterium, Mycobacterium leprae, there we go, can also cluster in the nasal region, affecting the surrounding bone. The museum has rare medieval examples of skulls, hands, and feet that reveal for the first time the presence of this debilitating disease in the fourth cataract of the Nile. One vivid such display is the skull and foot from men aged 35 to 49 years, they're guessing, and each of these men suffered from leprosy. It's from the site 3J18, and they're skeletons 2097, the skull, and 2139, the foot. They're out of the fourth Nile cataract in the Sudan Christian period, so you're talking 6th to 15th century AD. So they're still old, but they're newer than other things we've discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And these examples show the delicate bones in and around the nasal cavity that have been destroyed by leprosy. These changes, called rhinomaxillary syndrome, are a characteristic sign of the condition. Most of the toe bones, phalanges, depicted have also been lost to leprosy. Two of the longer and larger foot bones, the metatarsals, are affected, resulting in a sharpened or sort of chopped appearance. And I have pictures of these. I'm going to attach them. You all can make your own judgment. But it it is quite clear that clearly the owner of this skeleton was going through something terrible. And another example is a cartonnage mummy case and skeleton of a young child who suffered from brittle bone disease. It is from Spios Artemidos, Beni Hassan, Egypt. The child would have died during the 22nd dynasty, which dates it around 945 to 716 BC. Osteogenesis imperfecta is a genetic disorder that affects bones, making them unusually brittle and fragile. It's characterized by bones that break easily, often for little or no apparent reason. In the incredible, rare archaeological piece on display, many of the long bones in the child's skeleton show signs of healed fractures and resulting deformity from those.
Wow.
The production of Long Book of the Dead papyri declined in the late Ptolemaic period, though short selections continued to be used until the Roman era. From the 4th century BC, the Book of the Dead was increasingly replaced by other texts. These included liturgies used in temple rituals and new compositions such as the 2 Books of Breathings and the Book of Traversing Eternity. The opening phrases of the Books of Breathings demonstrate that the texts have the character of divine decrees to grant new life to the deceased. These were catchily named passports, and these passports to the afterlife were sometimes folded up like letters and placed at the head or the legs of the mummy. So very much like carrying your passport.
Right?
Yeah, folded up right near your head. That's where I want my passport. And such late texts were also sometimes inscribed on wood boards placed underneath the mummy. Provision of funerary texts had been abandoned by the 4th century AD, together with mummification and other features of traditional pharaonic burial practices. And that is the quick recap of a collection I could have stayed in all day. There are many things I had to cut or leave out or didn't photograph well to get the information. So if you have a favorite death ritual of ancient Egypt that wasn't mentioned, let us know.
Oh, yeah. This was awesome. I love learning about different sorts of cultures and traditions.
Yeah, and I'm particularly, of course, interested in the afterlife maintenance of many different cultures. So I was very excited to see this whole exhibit designed around it.
Well, it's just so interesting that each person has a different version of essentially the same thing, but something that's essentially custom designed for them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's all very honorific of the dead. It's very, careful planning, very detailed carving, very detailed painting, very intentional, every aspect of it. It's very cool.
Well, that is all that we have for you today. So thank you so much for listening to Have You Heard About This Case? If you liked this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also find everything we referenced on our Instagram today at Have You Heard About This Case Pod. And you can also find us on TikTok at HYHATC. Or you can email us at haveyouheardaboutthiscase@gmail.com. Thank you, and we'll talk to you later.
Bye.